Hey folks, and welcome. My name is Lance Spitzner, and thank you so much for inviting me today. Very excited to be virtually part of Texas. Before we jump in, just real briefly about me. As mentioned, my name is Lance Spitzner, and I'm a director and an instructor at the SANS Institute. My job and passion there is helping organizations better understand how to manage their human risk. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years now. The first 10 years or so, highly technical, Sun Microsystems, pen testing, firewalls, cyber intel, honeypots, forensics, pretty much did it all. But really the past 10 years or so, I flipped to the human side because that is where I passionately feel we can make the biggest difference. So that is why I'm so excited today to share with you about security culture. Really, what is it and why should we care? So before we jump into the what and why, let's start first with the problem. I always like to start with the problem before I jump into the solution. Oh, by the way, at the end of this talk, I'm going to share with you my email address. So if you have any questions, keep them in here. And then just shoot me an email when we're done. Okay, back to the talk. Starting with the problem. What is the problem? Well, when I started in cybersecurity 20 years ago, cybersecurity was primarily, pretty much purely a technical challenge. But fast forward to today, we need to also start taking the human into account. Now, lots of different data points to really hit this home, but probably my single most favorite one is the most recent one from this year's Verizon DBIR. If you're not familiar with this report, it's probably one of the world's most respected data-driven reports on the most common drivers of breaches and incidents at a global level. And for the past 3 years, they've found that the human is the biggest driver of breaches today. And for this year, they actually put a number on it. After analyzing thousands and thousands of breaches globally, they identified over 85% of breaches globally where it had the human involved at some point. In other words, people were involved in breaches in over 85% of breaches. And they also found less than 5% of breaches were purely a technical exploit, where there was just technology alone involved. So first of all, people, we have to start addressing the human element, or we're just going to continue to lose this battle. But why is that the case? Well, as I mentioned, 20 years ago, technology or security was perceived primarily as a technical challenge. And 20 years ago, it was pretty easy to hack into technology. In 2000 and 2001, the average life expectancy of a default Microsoft Windows computer was about 3 hours. In other words, a cyber attacker would find and hack it in 3 hours. We know this for a fact to include based on the research from the HoneyNet project. Now, fast forward 20 years, and nowadays it is very, very hard to hack into the default installation of any modern Microsoft Windows computer. And that is because in the past 20 years, Microsoft has implemented a huge number of technical controls to secure the default installation. And this is just a small overview of all of those different technical controls. As a result, today, I put that default system on the internet. It can take weeks, months, if not years, before somebody finds and can hack into it. That is until the human touches the keyboard. Once people interact with technology, as we know, game over. But why is that the case? Well, if we've done this for the Windows operating system over the past 20 years, what have we done for the human operating system over the past 20 years? Comparatively, very little. We've done very little to train and educate people in their terms. We've done little to make cybersecurity simple for them. As a result, I would argue we have become so good at using technology to secure technology. We are literally driving the cyber attacker to target and hack the human. In fact, that is why I am not a fan of saying people are the weakest link. That implies it is their fault. I would argue in many ways it is our fault. And that's why I prefer to say people are the primary attack vector. In some ways, it takes the blame off them, and in some ways, it puts it on us. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today, how we can address the human element, but primarily from a culture perspective. So what is culture and why do I care? It's that squishy thing that everybody talks about, but really nobody knows what to do about. Culture is people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs. And the idea of organizational culture is something that has been well researched over the past several decades. Hundreds, if not thousands, of publications, books, research, and case studies. And quite often, culture is equated to an iceberg. A culture, like an iceberg, can be hard to move. And culture, like an iceberg, most of it is hard to see and measure. If you would use the iceberg model, everything below the water would be what people are thinking, their attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs. The only part we can really see are what people say and what people do. So if culture is primarily what people think, their attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs, what is a security culture, and really, why do I care? Security culture are people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs about security. Quite often, it's their attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs about your security team and your security policies, because to them, it's all the same thing. So what are their attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs towards security? And the reason we care is this. The stronger your security culture is, the more likely people will exhibit strong, secure behaviors. But also, the stronger your security culture is, the more likely all of your different security initiatives will succeed. How many vulnerability management programs fail because there is a toxic culture between the security team and IT operations? How many DevSecOps initiatives fail because there's a toxic culture between the security team and developers? Or you're doing a single sign-on rollout, FDE rollout, MDM rollout. A lot of security initiatives fail because not of the technology, but of the security culture. It's one of those things that permeates everything we do. And it's one of the reasons why organizations struggle so much securing their workforce. So, what are the indicators of a strong security culture? Now, here is a couple of my favorite indicators, but probably my absolute favorite indicator is the very first one. If you read the very first one, people feel safe reporting an incident, even if they caused it. Now, if you have a very punitive culture, a very arrogant or egotistical security team, people aren't going to want to report it. In fact, if they get their computer infected with ransomware and you have a very negative security culture, they may actually think to themselves, wow, if I pay this ransom, maybe I won't have to tell anybody that my computer got infected. Another one is when people are actively engaging your security team, asking for help. Hey, can you come to our meeting for our briefings? They're asking questions, things like that. If your workforce is avoiding your security team like the plague, that's an indication of a weak security culture. Now, I'm not going to read all of these. You can read, but these are just some of my favorite indicators. Do we have a strong security culture, or do we have a weak, or even worse, toxic security culture? And if you're not able to answer yes to some of these, or if you're concerned that you have a more toxic culture, That could be why you're running into so many issues. Now, I know I get, hey, the security team goes, but we're trying so hard. We're reaching out to people. We're communicating to people. We're trying to enable people. They're just not doing what we tell them to do. They just don't understand us. And I totally get it. We perceive ourselves as the digital guardians of cyberspace. We're the heroes to help people. Why don't they get it? This is why. You and I perceive that this is what we do. But the problem is when we start sending emails to the workforce, when we start talking to IT admins or developers or accounts payable or to our leadership, while we perceive this, what they perceive, what they see is this. Yes. By the way, can you name which movie this is from? I'll give you a moment. I will give you a hint. If you know the name of this movie, A, it means you're a nerd, and B, it means you're a really old nerd. It's from the movie, classic 80s movie, Revenge of the Nerds. Highly recommended, by the way. But seriously, the problem is this. A lot of times when we are communicating to our workforce, to our leadership, updating people on our policies, rolling out a new initiative, we're speaking geek. And to you and I, we perceive it as really, really simple and very, very common sense. But to the rest of the world, we've totally lost them. So what can we do? Well, fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, there is an entire field of study on culture. Not security culture, but just culture in general. How to make your culture more innovative, how to create a safety culture, how to create a wellness culture. And as I mentioned, there are decades and decades and decades of research, case studies, scientific theory on organizational culture. And these are just some of the many books that have really helped influence me and better understand culture. Because if we want to build a strong security culture, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's go already to what people have already discovered and researched in books like these, and then apply them to our world. Far too often in cybersecurity, we try to reinvent the wheel. And instead of reinventing the wheel, let's just build on the work of others. And so these are all different types of research in organizational culture. And what's interesting is as you begin to study all this research, they're all pretty much saying the same thing. So what I'm going to do in this short talk is synthesize 2 key lessons from all of this research to enable you to build a stronger security culture. By the way, if you're interested in starting research in this field, all of these are really fantastic books, but I recommend you start with this one as it's probably one of the easiest ones to get started in organizational culture, behavior change. The book right above it, Thinking Fast and Slow, is probably the hardest one, but Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for that book alone. It also took me 2 to 3 months just to read that one book. So what are the lessons learned? Well, first of all, our goal is not so much to change our organization's culture, but to embed cybersecurity into the existing culture. We want to align security with it. And 2, changing culture is not about one big security initiative. All right, let's go out, communicate all this stuff, and 6 months later, poof, we have our culture. There's really no such thing as a single culture initiative. Instead, your security culture is driven by every time your workforce interacts with your security team, every time your security team develops and or communicates a policy, every time you and or your security team enforces a behavior or enforces a policy. In other words, the behaviors you reward and punish. So your cultures over time are really driven by your security team and the policies they develop and enforce. So what we need to do is take this scientific knowledge and apply it to our world. And one of the very first things that you quickly learn, and this is from Daniel Kahneman's book, but the others reference and also, is in many ways, people think and operate at 2 different levels, system 1 and system 2. System one is emotion, gut instinct. System two is logic, analytics, rational. We like to think the human brain is operating in system two at all times, very logical, rational. But that's how we like to perceive ourselves, like Spock. But all the different research has shown us that while humans can operate at a very logical, rational level, say you're solving a math problem, the vast majority of the time, by default, you're operating at a very much gut instinct, intuitive level. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, is all about this. And if you think about it, it makes sense because operating from a very emotional gut instinct, intuition kind of perspective saves calories, saves energy, just gets us straight to the point. So system two, logic, rationalize, think Dr. Spock. Intuitive, gut instinct, emotion, think Homer Simpson. The whole reason I'm bringing this up is this. People by default, including me and you, our brain prefers to operate in the Homer Simpson mode, the emotional mode. It's just simpler and faster. We only engage the Spock mode, system two, when we have to. Why is this important? Because I tend to see everything in cybersecurity is designed, architected, and communicated, assuming Dr. Spock. In reality, all of our policies, all of our communication, and all of our outreach should be for Homer Simpson. And I'm not saying people are stupid. I'm just saying by human nature, we tend to operate from a very emotional, intuitive perspective. So hopefully you're already beginning to see why we're running issues with our security architecture policies, things like that, when we start bringing in people. So when it comes to building that culture, what can we do? Well, we need to apply force, a change. But people are just like mass or an object. Remember Newton's famous first law, an object at rest stays at rest unless we apply a force. And that force was mass times acceleration. Exact same thing for people. All the research shows by nature, people don't change the way they think or behave unless a force is applied. And we too are going to apply a force, but instead of MA, we're calling it ME because it's all about me. Actually, what we're going to do is ME stands for motivate and enable. And this is what I mean by it. Anytime you're communicating to your workforce, anytime you're developing or architecting a policy, process, or procedure, anytime you need to enforce good or bad behaviors, apply the ME principle. And the ME principle is how can we motivate people about cybersecurity and how can we enable cybersecurity? Now, you could spend days on these topics alone. And in fact, I do. I teach a 5-day course on security culture. But at the highest level, you can use a variety of different models and frameworks to both motivate and enable people from a cybersecurity perspective. And I'm just going to do the highest, briefest overview of both of these, starting with motivate. Now, the key number one takeaway from motivation is this concept called start with why. Lots of great books on this concept, lots of great research, models and frameworks, John Cotter's 8 Steps, the book Switch, Made to Stick. But my favorite is this Simon Sinek's Start with Why. That's the name of the book, but the book really centers around what he calls the golden circle. And there is a mind-blowing 17-minute talk about the golden circle on TED Talks. Just do TED Talk, golden circle in Google, boom, it's awesome. And ultimately, what Simon shows us is the most influential leaders, the best marketing programs, best marketing initiatives, things like that. Apply the golden circle. And what you don't want to do is start your communications to people or your marketing initiatives to people with the what and the how, but you always want to start with the why. If you can explain why something is important, why people are going to benefit, why it's all about me, they're far more likely to engage. You're far more likely to motivate people. And if you think about it, this is why so many security initiatives fail. Security teams, it's not that security teams are bad at communicating the why. It's in a lot of cases, we never try. We never even think about it. To us, the why part is just common sense. Everyone should know. Or we just mandate it and then we take a baseball bat. Why? Because I said so. And then we wonder why there's so much resistance, why people don't do what we ask them or tell them to do. We have to start all of our communications and initiatives, rolling out a vulnerability management program, make sure IT ops first buys into the why. Rolling out DevSecOps, make sure developers buy into the why. One of my absolute favorite ways to explain this is password managers. A lot of organizations are rolling out password managers to their workforce, so making passwords easier for them. And quite often I'll see a password manager rollout, something like this. The security team will roll out an email Monday morning and then tell everybody, okay, folks, starting this week, everybody has to implement password managers. This is what they are, and this is how you use them. Good luck. You have to be doing it by Friday. We never even consider explaining the why. And then we wonder why there's all this resistance. In fact, I have a great example right here of a typical email sent out by security teams announcing a password manager rollout. It tends to be too technical. By the way, I'm just going to let you read this. I'm not going to read it. But it tends to be technical, easy for us to understand, but for most of the workforce, nerds, they don't get it. We're confusing them. Two, quite often when we're explaining the value of something, it's all about the security team and how to secure the company. Remember, people are not rational. They're emotional. When you explain why something is important to the company, people will get it, but then they forget it. But if you explain why it's important to them, they're far more likely to get excited. They're far more likely to buy in. And that is where you start building your strong security culture. If you announce a password manager program or initiative like this right here, people are just going to tune you out. They're going to be, oh, great, another thing mandated by the security team. They're always a pain in the ass. I can never understand their emails. Why are these people so egotistical, arrogant, confusing, technical? They're a pain in the ass. And then you don't understand why you have that negative security culture. Whereas think about it, if we applied this concept of start with why, and we explain with people, hey, do you hate passwords? You know what? The security team does too. But we've got this awesome solution that's going to make your life so much simpler. It will remember passwords for you. It will log you into websites for you. It will generate passwords for you. It will verify the authenticity of websites for you. Even more exciting, our vendor has given us a free copy to give to all of you to use for your personal use at home and help secure your family. Now, both emails, exact same thing. Announced a security initiative called Password Managers. But the first one was very technical and all about why or how it benefited the company. This one is all about, hey, we're solving your problems, we're making your life simpler, and we're going to make you more secure, not only at work, but at home. And the security team's looking out for you. Now we're the heroes. Now we're building a stronger culture. Now people are banging on your door. Hey, how do I get this password manager thing? And you can do this same thing for 2FA, FDE, VPN, or whatever initiatives you have going out there. It just takes a brief moment and explain the why. But the other side of the coin is the enable. Far too often, we make cybersecurity really hard for people. Yes, you and I perceive it as simple, but yes, it's our job, it's our passion, and we deal with it every day. Have you ever gone to a tax accountant and they start speaking their lingo and you're like, what are they saying? Or a doctor or a lawyer or a mechanic? We got to remember, just because it's easy for us, it doesn't mean it's easy for them. So we want to architect an environment where people are going to find it as easy as possible to do what we want them to do. For example, at Schiphol Airport, they had a problem with spillage. In other words, and this was only happening in the boys' room, in the men's room, but in the case of the urinals, men were consistently missing in the urinals, making a mess. So instead of creating all these signs telling people or telling all the men how to improve their aim, they simply put a sticker of a fly or a spider at the bottom of the men's urinals. And as a result, 80% reduction in spillage, 8% overall reduction in costs, radical change in behavior, all by architecting an environment to get people to do what we want them to do, but in this case, with a simple sticker. The other flip side is not only architecting an environment where we get people to do what we want them to do, but provide as little information as possible. Far too often in cybersecurity, we overwhelm people with tips, tricks, choices, attack vectors, things like that. The fewer behaviors we teach, the simpler we make cybersecurity, and the more likely they'll exhibit the behaviors we want. Let me just give you a quick example, and then we're going to wrap things up. Passwords. Huge pain point. Nobody does what we ask them to do. But if you think about it, we've made passwords really, really complex. We're telling people, hey, folks, passwords are so simple. 16 characters, uppercase, lowercase, symbol, number, mix in the blood of a virgin. Oh, by the way, every password has to be unique for every account and change them every 90 days. And by the way, you can't write them down. But what can we do going through that process and simplifying it so people do exhibit the behaviors we want? First, start with password expiration. That's a very, very painful, costly behavior that 20 years ago may have had value, but in today's world has no value. Nowadays, if a bad guy gets your password, they get it right away. They're not going to wait 90 days before they use it. 2, if you think having everyone in your organization change that number 1 at the end of the password to a number 2 has any value, well, we're really misguiding ourselves. And then finally, quite often password expiration has password history, which means there's multiple hashes now for the bad guys to crack. So first of all, password expiration, in most cases, we can get rid of. But can we replace our policies with technology too? I love things like biometrics or single sign-on. They make passwords so simple. So are there passwords or policies can we eliminate? Can we replace them with technologies? Can we simplify the policies? Absolutely. When it comes to passwords, eliminate complexity, replace with length. Passphrases. Length is the new entropy. Multiple words, easier to remember, easier to type. If we can't remove the policy, if we can't replace it with technology, if we can't simplify the policy, then can we give people tools to make the job easier? And this is where things like password managers are fantastic. And this would be a great process to apply to your most painful policies. What are the policies that people hate the most or have difficulty following or complain about the most? Instead of blaming them, take a step back, go through this process. The simpler we make cybersecurity, not only will more likely will people do it, but the simpler we make it, the more they like us. That is one of the key fundamental approaches to building your strong security culture. And then find fun, easy ways for people to consume and understand it. Policies, security, communications, things like that tend to be very technical and or very legal. Here's an awesome idea. USAA, one of the largest banks in the United States, based in where? Texas, by the way, down in San Antonio. Huge fans of them. And they actually, for their customer support team, document their policies and processes using a comic book. And what they've done is it's the same policies you would find in a real security policy book, but they're communicating in a way that's easy for people to understand. Remember, just because you or I understand it doesn't mean it's simple for other people. Take your policy, ask your mom to read it. If mom can't understand it, then perhaps most of your workforce can't understand it also. All right, we're wrapping things up. Couple of key takeaways. First and foremost, a strong security culture enables you to have a more secure workforce, but also more successful security initiatives. By security culture, I mean people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs towards cybersecurity. And really, that is driven by how your security team interacts with the workforce, the emails they send out, the conversations they have on Slack, the policies you develop, and the behaviors you enforce, either reward or punish. I really, really recommend partnering with your communications team, having them help you build communications that A, everybody understands, but B, starts with why. Anytime you communicate to your workforce, start with why should they care, and from a personal level. Remember, we're communicating to Homer, not Spock. Finally, we want to make security as simple as possible. Communicate as few tips and as few policies as possible. And the policies and tips you do communicate, make them simple to understand, consume, and follow. All right, folks, that was fast and furious. This is something I'm really, really passionate about. And this is something we're hearing more and more about. Security is no longer just a technical challenge. It's a human challenge also. And until we start addressing both sides of that coin, we are going to continue to lose this battle. As promised, if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. This is my work email address. Otherwise, thank you so much. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.